I still remember that Sunday morning in early March of 2021. The kind of morning that looks ordinary on the surface. Quiet, pale sunlight sneaking through half-closed blinds, the smell of stale coffee still lingering from the night before, but in hindsight, it feels like the calm before a storm that would rip through everything I thought I knew about love, trust, and loyalty. At that time, my life felt steady, I guess. Predictable in the way most people my age crave. I was 33, living in a modest but comfortable two-bedroom apartment in Austin, Texas. The pandemic had loosened its grip by then. People were going back to offices. Mask mandates were fading, and there was this collective urge to start over. And I was ready to start over too. Or at least that's what I told myself every morning when I looked at the mirror. My wife, Hannah, was 31. We'd been married for 5 years, together for almost 9. She was the kind of woman people instantly liked. Calm, composed, that soft kind of beautiful that didn't scream for attention but still drew it effortlessly. She worked in marketing for a small digital firm that handled clients all over the US. She loved her job, and I loved that about her. Or maybe I loved the version of her that existed before work began to mean everything. I worked as a freelance graphic designer. It wasn't glamorous, but it paid the bills and gave me time that I thought I was spending wisely on our life together. Our evenings were usually quiet. Sometimes we'd watch old sitcoms on Netflix, Friends, reruns mostly, or order takeout from that Thai place on Riverside Drive. On weekends, we'd drive to her parents' house in Round Rock or visit mine in Dallas. Life was simple, unremarkable, but comforting. But now that I look back, I see the small cracks that had started forming long before I noticed them. It started subtly, the late-night work calls, the extra weekend projects, and the way her phone was always face down on the table. I didn't think much of it at first. I mean, everyone gets busy. I knew the marketing world was fast-paced and deadlines came in waves. I trusted her, genuinely, blindly. Her company had hired a new consultant around November 2020, a guy named Evan Ross. I remember the first time she mentioned him. We were having dinner and she was scrolling through her phone, half listening to me talk about a new client. She suddenly said, "Oh, our new consultant is such a lifesaver. He's helping us reorganize campaigns and client reports." I nodded, not thinking twice. Evan, generic name. Generic situation. No reason to raise an eyebrow, but over the months his name kept coming up, casually at first, then almost daily. Evan said this. Evan suggested that. Evan thinks we should try this approach. I started jokingly calling him her work husband. She laughed it off every time, told me not to be silly. And maybe that's what I was. Silly, naive, or just too trusting for my own good. There was one evening in January when she came home looking absolutely drained. She said they had a huge client presentation the next morning and that she might have to stay up late to revise everything. I offered to help, not with the work, obviously, but maybe make coffee, sit with her, keep her company. She smiled faintly and said, "Thanks, but I'll work better alone." That night, she worked in the living room until past midnight. Or at least that's what I believed. I was in bed, half asleep, when I heard faint laughter coming from the other side of the apartment. It wasn't the kind of laugh you make during a tense work meeting. It was soft, playful, the kind of laugh she used to make with me. I told myself I was imagining things. I didn't want to be that husband, the paranoid one. I brushed it off, but after that night, something changed in her. She became distracted, distant. When I'd ask her how her day was, she'd give short, clipped answers. When I'd reach out to hold her hand, she'd pull away, not in a rude way, just absent-mindedly. I told myself maybe she was tired, maybe stressed. That's what love does to you. It gives you excuses when reality is trying to speak. In February, she told me she'd be traveling for a few days to Dallas for a client workshop. That wasn't unusual. She'd gone on work trips before. She said Evan would be there too since he was handling the consulting part. Again, I didn't think much of it. I even helped her pack. She kissed me goodbye at the airport, and I remember how natural everything felt, how utterly normal. But the human heart has a strange way of knowing when something's off, even when the mind refuses to see it. The first real red flag came 2 days later. I called her one evening just to check in. She didn't pick up. Not a big deal, I thought. Maybe she's in a meeting. Then I texted her, no reply. Hours went by. Around 11 p.m., she finally called back, sounding tired and rushed. She said she had been working late, that the hotel Wi-Fi was terrible, and that she was sharing notes with Evan in the lobby. I remember something about the way she said his name, quick, defensive, that made me pause. Still, I let it go. Because that's what trust looks like, right? Giving someone the benefit of the doubt, even when your gut screams otherwise. When she returned, she was oddly cheerful. Too cheerful. She brought me a t-shirt from the Dallas airport and a box of chocolate truffles, both things she never usually bought. It almost felt like guilt disguised as affection. I remember hugging her, inhaling the faint smell of someone else's cologne on her jacket, and feeling a small pit open up inside me. I didn't say anything. I didn't want to believe what my instincts were whispering. A week later, I accidentally saw a notification pop up on her phone while she was in the shower. It was a text from Evan. Just one line. Had an amazing time. Can't stop thinking about it. I froze. My first instinct was denial. Maybe it was about work. Maybe he was talking about a meeting, a successful pitch. But my heart knew. You can always tell when words carry a different kind of weight. I didn't open her phone. I didn't want to cross that line yet. Instead, I waited. I watched. Over the next few days, she was constantly smiling at her phone, taking calls in the balcony, whispering, giggling, all the small things I used to be on the receiving end of. And the worst part? I didn't confront her, not then, because part of me was terrified of the answer. By early March, my trust was hanging by a thread. That's when everything came crashing down. On March 10th, I got a call from one of my design clients who happened to be staying at the Hilton Garden Inn in downtown Dallas, the same hotel Hannah had stayed at during her supposed work trip. He mentioned, offhandedly, that he saw someone who looked exactly like her checking into the same hotel again that morning, but she had told me she was at the office in Austin. My stomach sank. My hands started trembling before I even realized what I was about to do. I opened Find My iPhone. We had shared our locations for emergencies. My heart started racing when her phone showed up not in Austin, but in Dallas. Again, I remember just sitting there staring at the screen, my mind trying to find any reasonable explanation. Maybe she had another meeting. Maybe she forgot to tell me. Maybe it was all innocent. But when I called her, she didn't pick up. That's when the doubt turned into something else. Something sharp and burning. I didn't plan what I did next. It just happened. I got into my car, threw an overnight bag in the back seat, and started driving toward Dallas. 3 hours on the highway, my heart pounding louder than the road beneath me. I reached the Hilton around 4 p.m., checked the parking lot. Her car was there, and so was Evan's. My legs felt like concrete as I walked into the lobby. I asked the receptionist, pretending to be a relative, if Hannah Reed had checked in. She looked at me carefully, then said, "Yes, sir. Suite 908. That number would be burned into my memory forever. When I reached the 9th floor, my hands were shaking so badly I could barely press the elevator button. I walked down the hallway, stopped outside Suite 908, and just stood there, listening. My heart was slamming against my ribs, my breath shallow, my thoughts spinning. Then, I heard laughter, muffled, intimate, unmistakable. Hers, and a man's voice. That was the moment everything changed. I stood outside Suite 908 for what felt like an eternity, my ears straining against the muffled sounds coming from inside. The laughter. The soft, almost flirtatious banter. It wasn't the kind of laughter shared over a joke or a work success. It was warm, intimate, the kind of laughter that belonged in private, not in a hotel hallway filled with strangers. My chest tightened, a cold, sharp weight pressing against it, making it hard to breathe. I remember thinking, no. This can't be happening. Not Hannah, not now. But my brain didn't stop. It didn't give me the luxury of denial anymore. Every scenario I tried to convince myself of, work stress, a casual dinner with a colleague, a friendly meeting, evaporated in the face of the sounds leaking through the door. My mind knew the truth, long before my heart was ready to accept it. I shouldn't have done what I did next. I knew that. But I couldn't help myself. My hand hovered over the door, trembling so violently I almost dropped the small bag I'd brought. And then I heard it, the unmistakable sound of a kiss. Not a chaste peck on the cheek. Not a friendly greeting. A kiss with teeth and breath mingling. A kiss that shattered every image I'd ever held of our marriage. I wanted to scream. I wanted to run. I wanted to collapse on the hallway floor and cry until my body gave up. But I did neither. I did the only thing I could. I pressed my ear closer to the door, trying to absorb every detail, every sound, every word that confirmed what I already knew. I heard her voice, soft but deliberate, saying something that made my stomach twist. I didn't catch every word, but the tone said it all. She was enjoying it. She wasn't hiding it. And then his laughter, the same man whose name I'd reluctantly accepted into our lives, a sound that now felt like a knife carving its way into my chest. I remember my hands shaking uncontrollably. My vision blurred, not from tears, I hadn't cried yet, but from a mix of fury, disbelief, and heartbreak. My knees nearly gave way, and I had to lean against the wall, trying to breathe. How could she? I kept repeating it over and over like chanting a mantra, as if saying it enough times could somehow make it untrue. At some point, I found myself outside the door of the suite, my hand curled into a fist, knuckles white. The rational part of me screamed to leave, to go back to the car, to drive away and pretend I had no idea. But the emotional part, the raw, wounded part of me, needed proof. I needed to see it with my own eyes. I waited, listening for any movement, any indication they might leave. Minutes stretched into what felt like hours. The hallway was empty except for me and the distant hum of the elevators. My heart hammered in my ears, loud and chaotic, echoing my thoughts, echoing my disbelief. And then the door opened. I froze, half hidden behind the corner. I saw them step out together. Her hair was slightly messy, clothes disheveled in a way that screamed of intimacy. He had his arm around her, and she leaned in closer, laughing, touching his shoulder in a way that had no place in a professional setting. My chest constricted, and my stomach lurched violently. I wanted to speak, to yell, to demand an explanation. But all I could manage was to stand there, rooted to the spot, paralyzed by the weight of what I was seeing. They were smiling, chatting quietly, completely unaware, or maybe just unconcerned, that someone was watching. That someone's world had just been irrevocably shattered. I didn't confront them. I couldn't. Part of me wanted to, a tiny, screaming part, but it was overpowered by shock and humiliation. I turned and walked away, back toward the elevators, back toward my car, each step feeling heavier than the last. I felt like I was walking through quicksand, each second dragging me deeper into despair. Back in the car, I sat there for a long time, gripping the steering wheel so tightly my fingers ached. I stared out at the city lights, the traffic moving around me like nothing had changed, like the world hadn't just broken my heart into 1,000 jagged pieces, and yet everything had changed. My life, my marriage, my sense of self, all of it altered in a single unbearable afternoon. I tried calling her. Her phone went straight to voicemail. I left a message, nothing accusatory, just asking her to call me. Of course she didn't, not then. Not for hours. And when she finally did, it wasn't to explain or apologize. Her voice was light, casual, distant, the kind of tone people use when they know they've done something wrong but refuse to acknowledge it. The days that followed were a blur of heartbreak and disbelief. I couldn't eat, couldn't sleep, couldn't focus on work. I replayed that afternoon over and over in my mind. The laughter, the touch, the sheer intimacy that I had been denied for years. Every memory of our marriage, every tender moment we had shared, suddenly felt like a lie, like a carefully constructed illusion designed to trap me. And the worst part wasn't even her betrayal. It was the way I felt about myself. The nagging thought that maybe I hadn't been enough, that maybe I had failed her in ways I hadn't noticed. I questioned everything, my looks, my personality, my worth. The thing about betrayal is that it doesn't just break your relationship. It shatters your identity. You look in the mirror, and you don't recognize the person staring back. I started noticing things I had ignored before, little signs I had brushed aside, subtle changes in her behavior, fleeting moments of avoidance, the way she sometimes looked at me with eyes that didn't quite meet mine. Every coincidence suddenly made sense. Every excuse suddenly felt like a lie. I also had to deal with the practical side of life, work deadlines, bills, responsibilities, all while my entire emotional foundation was collapsing. I became a ghost of myself, mechanically performing the motions of life while inside, everything was burning. And then, the humiliation. Knowing that she had chosen him over me, that she had shared our private life with someone else, that she had taken what was sacred and turned it into a secret between the two of them. The humiliation was sharper than the heartbreak. cutting through every layer of my dignity, leaving me raw, exposed, and desperate for answers I didn't know if I was ready to hear. It was during one of those sleepless nights that I realized something terrifying. I couldn't just move on. I couldn't just pretend it didn't happen. Because the truth wasn't going away, and neither was the anger, the pain, or the need for closure. And so, somewhere between the heartbreak and the humiliation, a part of me hardened. A part of me decided that I wouldn't be broken silently, that even if I didn't know how, I would find a way to reclaim myself, to face the reality of what she had done and to confront the consequences. One way or another, that's when the plan started forming in the back of my mind. Not a plan for revenge at first, not yet, but a plan for understanding. A way to expose the truth, not for anyone else, but for myself. Because if I couldn't face it, if I couldn't see it clearly, I would never move forward, and so I began my descent into the part of life I had never imagined I'd live, a world of secrets, betrayals, and harsh truths. A world where the person I loved the most had chosen someone else, and where I would have to confront not only her actions but my own naivety, my own trust, and the fragile, broken pieces of my heart. That was the breaking point. That was the moment I realized my life as I knew it was over. Everything that came after, the fallout, the confrontation, the reckoning, stemmed from that single afternoon in March, outside a hotel suite that said everything I had been too blind to see. The days after that hotel incident were a blur of numbness, anger, and an emptiness that gnawed at me like a relentless animal. I went through life on autopilot, mechanically doing the things I needed to do, while my mind replayed every single moment over and over, twisting and replaying them like some cruel loop. Each replay made the pain sharper, each thought a fresh wound. At first, I tried to rationalize everything. I told myself maybe it was a mistake, maybe it was a fleeting lapse, maybe she regretted it. But deep down, I knew better. Every instinct, every memory, every tiny betrayal I had ignored before now screamed the truth at me. She had chosen him. And she had done it deliberately. I stopped answering her calls. I stopped replying to her messages. I even avoided checking social media because I didn't want to see her smiling face, posting pictures, pretending life was normal, pretending nothing had happened. But no matter how hard I tried, the images were burned into my mind. The way she had leaned into him, the laughter, the intimate touches I should have shared. It haunted me. I couldn't sleep. I would lie in bed staring at the ceiling, staring at the darkness, feeling the weight of the betrayal press against my chest. The apartment that once felt like a safe haven now felt like a cage. Every corner reminded me of her presence, her lies, her deceit. Even the faint scent of her perfume lingered on the couch, on the blankets, like a cruel reminder that she was still here in the spaces she had once called ours. But she was no longer mine. Work became impossible. I would sit in front of my laptop staring at blank screens for hours. My clients noticed my absence, my lack of focus. Deadlines were missed. Projects stalled. I barely managed to keep myself afloat financially. My life, my routine, everything I had built for myself, crumbling. And I hated that I let her do this to me, that I had allowed someone else to intrude on the life we had together without even seeing the signs. I called my best friend, Mark. He'd known me since college. I needed someone to tell, someone to vent to, someone who wouldn't judge. But when I spoke, words failed me. I could barely articulate what I felt.
She cheated, man, I managed.
And then the floodgates opened. I cried like I hadn't since I was a teenager. Crying became my only solace, my only outlet. My parents noticed. My mom called every day asking if I was eating, sleeping, taking care of myself. I lied to her, said I was fine, just stressed about work. The guilt of lying crushed me almost as much as the betrayal itself. I wanted to tell her the truth, but I couldn't. Not yet. Not until I figured out what I was going to do with the mess my life had become. And then came the paranoia. Every message notification made me jump. Every knock on the door felt like it could be her, laughing, hiding secrets I wasn't supposed to see. I started noticing patterns I had ignored before. The way she always locked the bedroom door when she was on Zoom calls. The way she kept her phone face down on the counter. The way she sometimes laughed in her sleep like she was dreaming of someone else. Every detail, once benign, now screamed betrayal. I even went back to that hotel in Dallas, just to stand outside Suite 908 again, hoping for some kind of clarity. Maybe I wanted to see him. Maybe I wanted to see them together one last time. But the suite was empty, cleaned and perfectly ordinary, hiding nothing but its own cold, sterile truth. No signs, no traces, just an empty hallway and the memory of everything I had imagined. Hannah tried to contact me several times during those weeks. I ignored her. Every text, every call, every voicemail felt like salt on a wound that refused to heal. I couldn't bear to hear her voice, couldn't bear the sound of her trying to explain herself, trying to justify what she had done. I knew there was no explanation that could fix this. Even friends and colleagues noticed a change in me. The vibrant, optimistic man I once was had become withdrawn, quiet, and guarded. I started avoiding social gatherings. I stopped answering invitations. I couldn't look at happy couples without feeling a pang of jealousy and despair. Life became a series of small, unbearable moments strung together by the thread of betrayal. Sleep deprivation started to take its toll. I would drift off for an hour, wake up in a cold sweat, heart racing, dreams haunted by her laughter and his presence. I started having panic attacks, sudden, crushing waves of anxiety that left me breathless, dizzy, trembling. I knew I needed help, but pride and shame kept me from seeking it. I couldn't admit to anyone that my wife had destroyed me, that the person I had trusted more than anyone in the world had taken my heart and torn it to shreds. At work, I started obsessing over small details. Emails from clients, projects, deadlines, nothing was normal. My focus shifted from creativity to surveillance. I found myself scrolling through her social media, reading comments, analyzing pictures, looking for evidence of her infidelity, proof that I hadn't imagined it. And the more I looked, the more I realized how deeply it had infiltrated my life. There were hints everywhere. Her subtle smiles at certain posts, the times she was tagged with him in photos I didn't notice, the little inside jokes I hadn't understood. Everything pointed to one undeniable truth. This wasn't a mistake. It wasn't a lapse. It was deliberate. One afternoon, while I was trying to work on a client project, my phone buzzed with a message from Evan. I froze. My hand hovered over the screen, trembling. The message was innocuous, professional sounding at first. Hope the presentation went well. But beneath the words, I could feel the arrogance, the smugness, the audacity of him reaching out to me, knowing exactly what he had done, knowing exactly the chaos he had caused in my life. I didn't respond. I threw the phone across the room. It hit the wall with a loud thud, the sound echoing through my empty apartment, a punctuation to the fury and helplessness I felt. Hannah came home that evening. I didn't speak. She tried subtly, tentatively to engage me, but I could barely meet her eyes. Every time she opened her mouth, I imagined her words coded in deception, each syllable another betrayal. I realized that I didn't even know the woman I had married anymore. The person who walked through the door that evening wasn't the woman I had fallen in love with, at least not entirely. Over the next few weeks, our marriage became a silent battlefield. The apartment, once a haven, felt like a war zone. We coexisted in the same space, but lived in separate realities. I went through the motions, paying bills, doing laundry, cooking when necessary, but emotionally, I had retreated into a shell. I was alive, but barely, and every night, as I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, I felt the weight of her betrayal pressing down on me like a physical force, suffocating, inescapable. I started noticing other people's reactions too. Friends would make subtle remarks, asking if everything was okay. Colleagues would offer concerned glances, but I didn't have the energy to explain. How could I? How do you condense the annihilation of your trust, the betrayal of your life partner, and the unraveling of your identity into a few words over coffee or a casual chat? You can't. It's too much, too raw, too unbearable to convey, and yet, even in the midst of this darkness, a part of me began to awaken, a small, flickering ember of determination. Anger, as raw and painful as it was, started to morph into something else. Not yet revenge, not yet action, but awareness. I began documenting everything: text messages, dates, times, locations. I started tracking her routines, Evan's patterns, piecing together the mosaic of betrayal that had been unfolding in plain sight. I didn't know what I would do with this information yet, but the act of collecting it, of understanding it, gave me a strange sense of control. Because control had been stripped from me completely. I had been blindsided, humiliated, left to navigate a maze of deceit with no map. But even in the chaos, I realized that knowledge, awareness, and preparation were my first steps toward reclaiming myself. And that's when the transformation began. Quiet. Subtle at first, almost imperceptible but unstoppable. I started thinking about what I wanted, about who I wanted to be when this was over, about how I would ensure that the person who had hurt me so deeply could not define me anymore. The fallout was devastating. Yes, but it also planted the seeds for the reckoning that would follow. For the first time since that hotel suite, I felt something beyond pain and despair. I felt the faint pulse of power, of possibility, of the eventual restoration of my life on my own terms. I didn't know when or how, but I knew that something had shifted. Something had awakened in me that could never be silenced again. It was around late April 2021 when I realized I couldn't just sit and stew in my pain anymore. The constant cycle of heartbreak, humiliation, and sleepless nights had taken its toll. I had lost pieces of myself to despair, but something inside me was snapping awake. I could feel the ember of anger and clarity growing into a flickering flame, and I knew I had to act, not just for revenge, but to reclaim my life, my dignity, and my sense of self-worth. The first step was accepting reality. I had spent weeks hoping she'd come clean, hoping that maybe there was some innocent explanation I had overlooked. But the evidence was everywhere, and the emotional truth was inescapable. Hannah had crossed a line I hadn't even realized existed in my mind until it was gone. Accepting that reality was painful, yes, but also oddly liberating. Once you see clearly, you can finally plan, you can finally act. I started meticulously documenting everything. Emails, texts, social media activity, photos, travel itineraries, receipts, the works. Every little detail mattered. It felt strange at first, like I had become a detective in my own life, but it also felt empowering. I wasn't the naive husband anymore, sitting in the shadows of deceit. I was awake. I was aware. I was taking control. I created a folder on my laptop labeled Evidence in all caps. It became my obsession. Every night I would sift through her messages, screenshots, timestamps, meticulously organizing the proof of what had happened, of how long it had been going on. The more I uncovered, the more my resolve solidified. The betrayal had been deliberate, and so would be the reckoning. At the same time, I started focusing on myself. I rejoined the gym I had abandoned during the initial months of lockdown, not just for my body, but for my mind. I started waking up earlier, cooking my own meals, even picking up old hobbies I had shelved: photography, reading, sketching. These weren't distractions from the pain. They were tools for rebuilding my identity, the parts of me that had been quietly eroded by her betrayal. Each day I felt a little stronger, a little sharper, a little more like myself again. The first breakthrough came when I discovered a pattern in their secret meetings. They were meeting every Friday night at a downtown Dallas hotel, always the Hilton Garden Inn, the same one where I had caught them initially. Evan had no idea I was tracking this. No idea that I had turned every piece of knowledge, every small clue, into a plan. I realized then that I had a choice. I could wallow in my despair, or I could confront them in a way that would leave no ambiguity, no room for denial. The thought of confrontation was terrifying, but it also felt necessary. I wanted her to see that I had not been oblivious, that I had not been weak, that she could not casually dismantle my life without consequences. The night I decided to act, I remember sitting in my car outside the Hilton, feeling the adrenaline thrumming through my veins. My hands gripped the steering wheel, cold and sweaty, my heart pounding like a drum in my chest. I had rehearsed the moment in my head countless times, but nothing could prepare me for the reality of standing there, so close to them again, knowing everything. I entered the hotel. My movements calculated, my demeanor calm. I checked in at the front desk under the guise of a conference guest, securing a room directly across the hall from theirs. The receptionist, blissfully unaware, handed me the key card without a second thought. Standing outside the door to their suite, I felt a rush of emotions: anger, fear, hurt, but also a strange sense of power. I had waited, I had planned, I had prepared. And now, for the first time since discovering the affair, I was no longer a passive observer. I was the one in control. I didn't burst in immediately. I stayed in my room, listening to the sounds coming from across the hall. Their laughter, soft and intimate, reached me again, and for a moment I felt the old sting, the familiar gut-wrenching ache. But then I reminded myself I had the evidence. I had control, and they had underestimated me. I began my confrontation carefully, strategically. I didn't scream, I didn't cry, I didn't beg. Instead, I made subtle moves to expose the truth, leaving little hints, sending anonymous messages to Evan's professional email, arranging for our mutual colleagues to see certain incriminating photos. Every action was precise, deliberate. I wasn't looking to humiliate them publicly in the crude sense. I wanted them to understand the gravity of what they had done and the impact it had on my life. Hannah's reaction was immediate when she realized I knew. Her calls, texts, messages started pouring in, desperate, panicked, pleading. But I didn't respond immediately. I let the silence hang like a heavy curtain between us, a reminder that she had shattered something sacred. Over the next few weeks, the tension escalated. Evan, realizing that he was being watched, tried to distance himself. Hannah oscillated between remorse, denial, and anger. It was a psychological chess game, each move calculated, each reaction anticipated. And through it all, I felt a sense of clarity I hadn't known in months. The despair that had consumed me began to transform into resolve. I was no longer the betrayed husband writhing in pain. I was a man taking his life back step by step. There was a moral conflict, of course. I wrestled constantly with questions of revenge versus justice, dignity versus vindication. I didn't want to become bitter or cruel, but I also refused to be a victim. I realized that the real power lay not in retaliation but in self-restoration. By documenting, confronting, and controlling the narrative, I was reclaiming myself, my narrative, and my future. The turning point came one evening when I finally confronted Hannah directly, not with anger, not with shouting, but with undeniable evidence laid bare. The photos, the texts, the patterns, everything meticulously cataloged, presented calmly, factually. Her face went pale, the casual arrogance replaced by shock, guilt, and finally a sense of helplessness. I watched as the woman I had once loved struggled to defend herself against the undeniable truth of her actions. And in that moment, something shifted inside me completely. The old me, the man who had loved blindly, who had trusted without question, was gone. In its place stood someone stronger, sharper, and unafraid to face the truth. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I didn't beg for apologies. I simply stood there quietly and let the truth speak for itself. The emotional weight had shifted, from me, burdened by betrayal, to her, weighed down by exposure and consequences. I realized then that taking action wasn't just about her or him. It was about me, my life, my self-respect, my ability to move forward. And that realization, that the power to reclaim myself had always been within me, waiting for me to awaken it, was intoxicating. By the time I left Dallas, the dynamic had irrevocably changed. I wasn't the same man who had driven into that city weeks earlier, consumed by disbelief and pain. I was someone reborn through heartbreak, someone who had faced the betrayal head-on and emerged with his dignity intact. Someone prepared to rebuild his life on his own terms. The affair, the humiliation, the heartbreak, they had all shaped me, forged me, made me sharper and more aware. And even though the road ahead would be challenging, even though trust and love would have to be rebuilt from scratch, I knew one thing with absolute clarity. I would never allow anyone to take that power from me again. It's strange how life has a way of teaching you lessons you never wanted to learn. That spring of 2021 was one of the darkest periods I've ever endured, yet it became the turning point that reshaped my entire sense of self. By May, the storm of betrayal had quieted. Not because forgiveness came, but because I finally stopped letting her actions control my emotions, my thoughts, my life. After the confrontation, Hannah and I barely spoke. She moved out shortly after, citing her own guilt and the irreparable fracture in our relationship. The apartment that had once felt like a prison of despair now became a sanctuary again, though it was quieter, emptier, and strangely liberating. I remember walking through the rooms alone for the first time without tears, noticing sunlight falling on the hardwood floors, the familiar hum of the city outside my window, and thinking, this is mine again. I survived. Rebuilding wasn't easy. Some days memories would hit me like a sledgehammer, an unexpected laugh, a song we used to love, even the scent of her perfume drifting through a store. But each time I reminded myself that I wasn't powerless anymore. I had taken control of my narrative, confronted the betrayal head-on, and emerged intact. That, more than anything else, became my anchor. Work became my refuge. I threw myself into projects with a renewed intensity, not out of distraction, but out of purpose. Every client email, every design draft, every late-night brainstorming session reminded me that I still had value, skill, and the ability to create something meaningful. Slowly, I began to feel pride in my own accomplishments again, something I hadn't realized I'd lost in the fog of heartbreak. I also started reconnecting with friends, something I had neglected during the emotional turmoil. I realized how much isolation had fueled my pain. I went out for coffee with Mark, laughing over trivial things, feeling human again. I joined a small photography club and even went on weekend hiking trips, watching the world in its slow, steady beauty. The simplicity of those experiences became almost meditative, reminders that life wasn't just about betrayal or loss, that there was still joy to be found, even if it felt small at first. Therapy helped too. I finally admitted to someone, a professional, a stranger with no attachment to my life, the depth of the emotional storm I had endured. Speaking it aloud, putting words to the pain and hearing validation in return was a revelation. I learned that betrayal isn't just about the act itself. It's about how it erodes your trust in the world, in others, and in yourself. Therapy didn't erase the pain, but it gave me tools to navigate it without losing myself entirely. Months passed, and I began to notice subtle but powerful shifts in my mindset. I stopped blaming myself. I stopped obsessing over what I could have done differently. I stopped imagining scenarios where things might have turned out otherwise. Instead, I focused on what I could control, my actions, my responses, my future. That focus became a shield against the lingering sting of betrayal. Then came a day that felt almost surreal. I was walking down 6th Street, Austin's heart of nightlife, when I noticed Hannah in a cafe window across the street. She was alone, sipping coffee, scrolling through her phone. For a moment, an old wave of anger surged, sharp and hot. But then I realized something profound. I didn't feel anything anymore. Not hatred, not longing, not heartbreak. I felt neutral, observant, unburdened. She had no power over me anymore, and I had not only survived, but thrived. By the summer of 2021, I had fully reclaimed my life. I moved to a new apartment in a different part of Austin, started a fresh routine, and even met someone new. Emma, a kind, grounded woman who shared my love for art and quiet mornings. She wasn't a replacement, and I didn't need her to be. She was a companion, a reminder that life could be gentle, joyful, and trustworthy again. With Emma, there was no deceit, no hidden agendas, only transparency and shared laughter. And that, more than anything, healed the remnants of the past. Looking back now, I realized that the betrayal, the humiliation, and the heartbreak were both the darkest and most transformative experiences of my life. They taught me the importance of self-respect, the necessity of boundaries, and the power of reclaiming control. I learned that being hurt doesn't make you weak. Staying broken does. But facing the pain, confronting it, and choosing to rise, that's where true strength lies. I don't know what became of Hannah and Evan in the months after. I never sought to find out. Part of me didn't care. Part of me understood that their choices were theirs, and their consequences, theirs to bear. My focus had shifted entirely to myself, to my life, to the future I was building with intention and integrity. Sometimes, when I'm alone in the quiet of my apartment, I think back to that moment outside Suite 908, the heartbreak, the disbelief, the almost paralyzing weight of betrayal. And I realize that moment, as painful as it was, became the catalyst for my growth. It forced me to confront my own vulnerabilities, to face uncomfortable truths, and to emerge stronger, wiser, and more self-aware than I ever imagined possible. By the end of that year, I had not only survived but grown in ways I hadn't thought possible. I had rebuilt trust in myself, in life, in love, slowly but deliberately. And I carried with me the knowledge that while betrayal can shatter your world, it doesn't have to define it. Life moves on. People leave. Mistakes are made. Hearts are broken. But what remains, what endures, is the strength you cultivate in the aftermath. I learned to stand tall, even when the ground beneath me had once crumbled. I learned to trust myself again, even when others had failed. And I learned, most importantly, that no one can take your power unless you let them. That's the lesson I carry with me every day. And every day, it makes me a little stronger, a little wiser, a little freer.